But let's get into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about a guide to employee management. And we say a guide to employee management, it's a real nebulous thing. It's kind of like customer service or relationship management or something like that. There are so many finite details and different things that occur within employees and managing them that it's really difficult to really just paint a picture of how you should manage them and tell you specifically about the things you need to know. So that's not what we're going to set out to do here today. What we're really going to set out to do is hit a few of the high points of things you might want to know that can help you better manage or get more out of your employees as you move forward. This may be the most troubling slide of the entire presentation. That is indeed me, Dan Trottenchek. I'm the editor and vice president of publishing for Hardware Retailing Magazine and the North American Retail Hardware Association. Below my title and all that, you'll see dant@nrha.org, and that is my email address. So I would encourage you, after the presentation's over, if you have any questions, comments, or would like further information about what we can offer you or additional materials we may have to help you through this employee management maze, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. So what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk first a little bit about something that's really important. I really want to set the stage for all of you. I know all of you understand that thoughtfully managing your employees is a difficult task, but it can be a very important task for you. We like to say that employees are your most valuable assets, and it's really true, not just from a touchy-feely, good-feeling sort of way to value your employees, but really for most of you, your employee compensation is probably the biggest line item, biggest expense item you have. And unfortunately, a lot of times, retailers or employers in general will spend a lot more time and effort doing something like maintaining their delivery truck than they do at maintaining and making sure that their employees are performing at their best. So I want to illustrate really quickly to you in the beginning of the presentation how important it is that your employees be on the same page with you and understand what you're trying to do as a retail organization. Nextly, we're going to talk about compensation. The NRHA conducts something called the Employee Compensation Report, where we go out and we talk to hundreds of stores, home centers, hardware stores, and lumberyards, and we ask them for information on how they compensate the different employees at different levels in their stores. We also ask them about the kinds of benefits they provide, what kind of vacation, what kind of time off, all those specific things. So we can publish a guide so you can have a benchmark, so you have a better understanding of where you stand, where other people are compensating their employees. So you can really see, am I about where I should be? Am I a little bit too high? Now, obviously, every area is very specific, and depending on the competition you have for employees and that sort of thing, the salaries could vary. But nonetheless, it's good to have a benchmark to throw up there and see what other stores of your kind are doing in terms of compensation. Then we're going to move on and talk a little bit about employee motivations. What motivates employees, what inspires them to do well, and what are some of the things that really frustrate employees. And recently, the editors of Hardware Retailing Magazine went out to some retail locations and actually sat down in focus groups and talked to the employees to try and determine what these factors are that can make them do a better job. Lastly, I'm going to spend a pretty good deal of time on talking about training for success and how you can really, for very little money, very little investment, and for a little bit more time, but set up a very comprehensive training program for employees, really designed to make them better employees and provide better service for your customers, which of course translates into more bottom line dollars and more productivity for you. So first thing, and again, this is kind of probably the second most frightening or troubling chart that you may see in the presentation, but it's also a good thing. It's really a mixed bag. We went out last year, late in the year, and we asked consumers who, of all the store types in the home improvement industry, who do you think delivers the best customer service? Well, the good news is 55% of the respondents said that they felt the locally owned store delivered the best customer service. 40% said they felt they got the best customer service from the big box store, and 5% said that they got it from the mass merchants. Well, again, the bright side of this is you can look at it and you can say, well, that's what I would figure. The locally owned stores, the majority of customers said the locally owned store delivered the best customer service. And they should, quite honestly, because locally owned stores, independent merchants, really for years have hung their hat on the fact that they can out-service the big boxes, that they can do a better job at providing individualized service to customers. And really, it has helped the independent hardware store, home center, and lumberyard survive, particularly during the proliferation of the big boxes, because you would advertise it, you would represent that to customers, and I think customers, as much a good a job as the independent retailer has done battling back from what's been a high price image, customers still figured that the reason I go to the independent merchant is because they can deliver better service. And according to our most recent study, it is true. The majority of customers feel that they get better service at the locally owned store. Now, here's the bad news. 10 years ago, when we conducted this survey, we asked the same question of consumers. And at that point in time, 64% of all consumers said they felt they got the best customer service at the locally owned store. So over a 10-year period, just one decade, the independent store have their edge when it comes to providing customer service has eroded by 11 percentage points. 9 percentage points. That's a big erosion in just a 10-year period, and it really does not spell good things for the independent merchant going forward unless you can find a way to reestablish your stores far and away as the best at providing customer service. So you need to do that. You need to really take a close look at how you define service and what steps you are taking to out-service the big boxes. And believe me, everybody could sit here and say that, well, that they don't get service at the big boxes, and 9 times out of 10, that's right. But the big boxes are investing a lot of time and effort and money to improving the service they offer, improve the customer experience once customers get in their doors. And if nothing else, you have to remember that perception and reality are oftentimes the same thing. And one thing the big boxes are always very good at is spending a lot of money on advertising, marketing, and promotions to convince customers that regardless of the service they receive, the actual service experience, they use a lot of those advertising dollars to convince customers that they are receiving good service. And according to our research, all of it is working because the gap is narrowing. How did we get to this? We conducted a month-long series of interviews with consumers, and we surveyed retailers asking them same questions. And this is interesting because it really is germane to this conversation because I want to point out a few things here. First, I want you to look at this first line. We asked our consumers and retailers, what is the single biggest factor you consider when it comes to a store delivering good customer service? And both retailers and consumers said that the single biggest factor is that the store has knowledgeable employees. So there you go. When you're talking about customer service, what's the one most important thing you can do to assure that you're delivering the customer service that customers are expecting? You could have knowledgeable employees. Now, these other factors are important. These other factors do come into play, but the single biggest thing you could do is to ensure that your employees know what they're talking about. Again, the retailers we talked to were pretty black and white on their definition of service. They knew that knowledgeable and friendly employees make a difference, but also it's important to point out that while knowledgeable employees and friendly customer service are very important, you can't discount the other areas of service. But for today, we're really just going to focus on that employee component. So we asked consumers and retailers, how important are the following factors when determining where you shop? And if you look, helpfulness of the staff, knowledge of the staff are all amongst the highest by consumers and retailers. So things like selection of products and price of products are important, but these two categories here that are considered very important by consumers both revolve around staff and staff knowledge. When it comes to employees, when we ask consumers, when you're dealing with employees, how do you determine whether that employee is delivering good service? They said that the employee exhibits knowledge about the products he or she is selling and that the employee has a pleasant demeanor and good attitude. So these are things that are both very important that you need to make sure your employees are delivering. Consumers want well-rounded employees who know about the products they're selling, but also know about the store policies and can give project advice. So as we talk about kind of this holistic approach to employee managing, it's very important to understand that you have to also holistically, just like consumers look at all the different aspects of your store when they're determining whether or not you deliver good customer service, you really have to consider all the aspects of training an employee to deliver good service. So it's not just always about product knowledge. Product knowledge is very important, but you also have to train them on things like selling skills, having a pleasant demeanor, being well versed in things like store policy, what hours you open, how do you accept returns, what services you offer. All of those things are very important. But as we've said time and time again, one of the most important things you can have when you're looking at developing employees, and this goes for whether you're running a hardware store, running a magazine, or running a shoe store, it doesn't matter, is attitude. You have to have employees that are willing to commit to customer service, that are willing to commit to the brand, that are willing to commit to the same kind of ideals that you have as an employer. And those are things that are far more difficult, if not impossible, to train than issues like customer service. When we ask choosing where to shop, what factors were important to consumers when choosing where to shop? The number one reason they said is, I am willing to pay slightly more for products if the staff is knowledgeable about the products they sell. And the next one down is, I am willing to pay slightly more for products if the staff is always friendly. So again, not only are customers saying it's the most important components to customer service is that you have good, friendly employees, they're also saying that it trumps price, that I'm willing to pay slightly more for products if you can have a staff that knows what they're talking about and has a smile on their face when I come in. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great strategy for you to say, well, I'll take advantage of that and I'll charge more. But if you think of the success you could have if you say, I'm going to be very competitive on price, and on top of that, I'm going to deliver these well-trained, knowledgeable, friendly employees. So what can they do? Better trained, friendly employees can drive more profits. Better trained, friendly employees can differentiate your store. Better trained, friendly employees can create value, which is what you're really seeking to do as a retailer today. So the first part of the seminar, what I want to do is just really establish how important it is. It is perhaps the most important function you perform as a retail owner or manager, is to make sure your staff is well educated and well trained and understands the brand and mission that you want to achieve, which should be servicing customers to the best of your ability. You know, we talked about the fact that today's consumer wants a combination of service, selection, and price, and you need to combine these offerings to reach out to new customers, and you need to advertise and deliver on your strengths. Well, that's another thing that I want to talk about just really before we dive into some of the meat of the employee management stuff, is leveraging your employees. Make sure that when you go out, if you put a lot of time and effort into training and developing your staff, that you're going to go out and you're going to leverage that in the community, that your advertising message does not always have to be about price or product. It can also be about the level of service you deliver. But an important caveat to that is that if you're going to, just like if you promise customers a price, if you say I'm going to sell something for $1.98, they have to be able to come in that store and buy it for $1.98. If you're out of the product, you better have a great backup plan for how you're going to give them a rain check or get them a similar product for the same price. It's the same way with service. If you're going to, whether it's through your advertising or if it's just word of mouth or just you going out there and promoting your service when you're talking to people around the coffee shop, you better be able to deliver it when they come into your store. So what do today's employees want? Well, again, like I said a little bit earlier as I was introducing the topic, we had hardware retailing editors go out and meet with retail employees, and we asked them to discuss different aspects of their jobs. It's a very simple process. We just went out and we had our editors sit down with employees and say, what are things that are important to you? And what are things that frustrate you? And it's not really brain surgery. It's just the willingness to go out and talk to employees. And that's one of the biggest things when it comes to employee management that is often a breakdown between the managers and the owners and the employees is communication. How often are you communicating with your employees? How often are you holding a meeting not to introduce a new product, not to talk about new policies, not to talk about dress code or cell phones or special promotions you have coming up, but to just sit around the table and say, what could we do better to help you do your job better? What can we do better to make you a better employee? It's so important is that it's so important that it's something that you should put on the schedule regularly. If it's quarterly, if that's all if you can do it twice a year, if you can do it once a year, but if you can do it quarterly, that's ideal, is to just sit down with your employees, buy them a pizza or bring in some sandwiches and some Cokes for lunch and sit down and say, all we want to talk about is how we can help you do your job better. How can we make you happier on your job? Because happy employees translates to happy customers. So when we went out and talked to employees, what did they say? Now, we did a study not too long ago where we asked former retail employees. We asked them why they left their job. And then we went back and we asked the store owners and managers why they felt they were losing employees. And there was a pretty big difference, is that most of the owners and managers pointed to one thing and one thing alone, and that was salary. It was compensation. And it's very much the same argument that many independent retailers have when they're talking about customers. You'll tend to dump customers into the same box and say the only thing that matters to customers is price, or the only thing that matters to employees is compensation. And time again, when we talk to employees, whether they be former employees or current employees, they say it's far more complicated than that. And today's employee, believe it or not, even today's economic environment, their compensation is not the highest thing on their list. There's always going to be some burger joint or some coffee shop that's going to offer 50 cents more an hour, and you're always going to have employees that leap to that job just to make the extra 50 cents. But if you ask employees what they want, they will tell you that it's not just about the money, that it's about creating an environment that helps them feel better as a person, that helps them do their job better, and helps them advance their cause. So it's not always just about the money, and oftentimes employees that are that satisfied with their job are less willing to move on. So today's employees, the employees that we talk to in our focus groups, what did they say? One of the biggest motivators for them, one of the biggest things that makes them want to do a job is having content customers. Now listen to that very clearly, because it's your employees telling you, we want to know, we like it. It feels good to us, and it helps us get us motivated and jacked up to do a better job the next day if we can make our customers happy. Boy, isn't that what you want? But the problem is, very infrequently, a lot of times if an employee does a good job with a customer, you might go up to that employee and pat him on the back and say, hey, good job. But the other employees also want to know about that. So you should look to share success stories. You should go out there and when someone does a good job or does a great thing with customer service, or you get a note or even a word of appreciation from a customer that says, hey, thank you for helping me, you got to share that with your whole staff and let them know that everybody has a part in making those customers happy, because that is one of the main motivators that the employees we talked to listed was, we like to know when we have happy customers. The other thing that they listed was it motivates them if they have a sense of family atmosphere at the business, a sense of community. And again, think about it. So many of these things are parallels to what customers want. The customers want many of the same things the employees want out of your business. There is a reason customers are being drawn more and more these days to a locally owned business, because they like that sense of doing business with a small town merchant, someone who operates locally. It's the same reason a lot of employees want to work for locally owned companies, because they want to have that feeling like they're part of something bigger. They don't want to just be a number. They want to be able to understand that you empathize with them and their families and their concerns, and in turn they're going to empathize with you and your concerns. So again, if there's anything you can do to foster that family atmosphere at your business, it's terrific. And we've got great stories and tales every day that we hear and we share with you through the pages of our magazine and any other way we can about retailers out there that go above and beyond when it comes to creating that family atmosphere. One of my favorite stories about that was a retailer who set up a fund at their operation where employees could donate a percentage of their paycheck, just like it was a 401k fund or something like that, and it was like an employee assistance fund. And they set up it was basically a peer review group where if any employee for any reason that was contributing to this fund needed money, and I believe one of the stories was one of the ladies had her hot water heater go out, and she needed money to replace it. So she would apply to this fund, and they would award you a check that would cover your costs. So it was kind of like a rainy day fund, but it was run by the business. And it was like a family helping family out. And those kind of things they don't get at large corporations. And again, it's one of the biggest things that makes them proud and happy and want to work harder for you. Believe it or not, when we did that survey many years ago where we asked the former employees why they left, the number one thing they said was, I was not given the tools I needed to do my job correctly. Guess what? Your employees do not like to look foolish in front of customers. When a customer comes in and says, what's the difference between this string trimmer and this string trimmer, and they don't know, they look stupid. So the employee is just craving the training they need so they can look smart, so they can be the customer service hero and deliver the kind of customer service you want them to deliver. But too often employers fall short in delivering the training and the on both product knowledge, on selling skills, and on attitude training to give the employee the tools they need to do their jobs right and well. And again, when we asked our most recently talked to these groups, they listed training. They want training. It helps them do a better job, and they like to do a better job because it lets them feel like a hero. Now, of course, on our list, financial incentives was listed. It's certainly an issue. I mean, let's face it, me, you, everybody, we all go to work at the end of the day because we get a paycheck. But we also get to choose where we want to work. And when it comes to financial incentives, a very important thing to remember is that you have to control your expenses. You have to control your costs. You understand that payroll is one of your largest line item expenses on your financial statements, and you have to be able to control that. So you can't just go around and being able to convince employees and share with them that you can't just go around and spread raises and things like that whenever you want. It's very important. That's one area where the 3 pennies of profit video will certainly help you, because it also illustrates to employees what a fine razor-thin margin that most home improvement retailers are working on. But one thing you can do that works out very well is you have to pay a fair wage, and we'll talk specifically about compensation in here in a minute, but you have to pay a fair wage, you have to pay a competitive wage, you have to be competitive with benefits and vacation and time off and all that sort of thing. But what you can do is you can find ways throughout the year to give kind of spur of the moment financial rewards. If an employee does a particularly good job, if they complete a training course, if they do something going above and beyond, reward them financially. It could be $100, it could be $500, it could be whatever you can afford to give, but it just sends the message to the employee that, listen, I'm trying to find ways to give you additional compensation, and it might not be through a traditional method, but it's through methods that still get you to where you want to be. And it says a lot to the employees that you're trying to reach out to them and that you realize that they want to make more money. Another thing you could do in this area that's really important is illustrate to your employees a path for growth. So many employees that come in, particularly when you're talking about full-time employees, they want to know that, are there ways that I can grow in this company? I understand that I make what I make right now, and I understand I'm being paid to do the job I'm doing, but how, as I move forward in the future, can I see different pathways? Because if they don't identify those pathways for growth, then they're more likely to look for jobs elsewhere. Lastly, on the list of things that motivate our employees is a flexible work environment. Again, it's one of those things that attracts them to working for a small business is there's a greater degree of flexibility. Now, all of these things, obviously, you have to control because you can't set up a schedule where employees come and go as they please. You have hours you have to cover and things you have to do. But in a family environment, in an independently owned business, in a small business environment, you should be able to afford that kind of flexibility that allows people to live your employees to live their family life and understand that things occur, and that kind of flexibility on your part is going to build the strength of employee loyalty as you go forward. Are you going to have employees that take advantage of that? Certainly you'll have employees that take advantage of that, but those are the kind of employees you don't need around anyway. And that's something else that's important to remember, is that turnover isn't necessarily always a bad thing. Every once in a while, I'm sure you guys can all point to specific examples, but everybody makes a bad hire. And it's probably better to move those employees out before you invest a lot of time and energy and resources into them. But everybody makes a bad hire, so turnover isn't always a bad thing. But the thing you need to focus on is, how do I get the bad ones in and out quickly, and how do I hold on to the employees that I want to keep that are going to grow my business and move my business forward? So on the flip side of the motivators, what are some of the things that were frustrating? When we talk to these employees, what are some of the things they say? These are my major frustrations on my job. Well, first up was not getting any recognition. And again, I mean, as a manager or owner, you have a very different perspective of the business, and you might really spend too much time focused on the big picture and not understand that employees all the way from part-time cashiers on up to your department managers and store managers and so on, they really need to have some sort of recognition for the jobs they do. And even a part-time cashier, when they're coming in and they're doing a good job, they want to be recognized for it. And again, all the more importance on why you need to spend some time making sure that where it's appropriate, that you recognize the efforts of every employee, from your entry-level part-timers on all the way up to assistant managers and managers. You need to spend time and make sure you focus on recognizing a job well done. 'Poor communication, another major frustration, is that all too often you get caught up in running the day-to-day operations of your business, and you don't understand that you need to translate information down to employees. And it goes back to what we were talking about. Oftentimes, it's very frustrating for employee and anti-motivational for them to not have the answer to a question, specifically when they're put on the spot by a customer. And so if you've added a new line of products, you need to communicate why you added the products, and you need to deliver product information to the employee. If you have instituted a new policy or added a new service, you need to make sure every employee understands that, because there's nothing more embarrassing than for a customer to come in and you tell them, oh, yeah, we added a new product. Then they go and talk to the new employee, and the employee says, I have no idea we had that. It's embarrassing to them, and it makes them feel foolish, and it makes them not want to do a good job. But it's also important that you communicate things about your business. Some of the most successful retailers we talk to are also some of the most open. They share financial results. They share performance data for the stores. They want all their employees to understand, to see that kind of information, because then the employees understand how important it is that they do a good job and that they are all pulling in the same direction. Particularly if you could tie that to some kind of profit sharing or some kind of financial reward for employees to give them. I know of one store, it's a very successful chain of stores down in Florida that tells employees daily how they do against sales quota, and then they give incentives for meeting daily, weekly, monthly quotas to all the employees. And it might end up just being somewhat of a token incentive, but it's fantastic for employees to know that, man, here's where we are daily. What do we have to do if we missed 2 days of our daily quota? What do we have to do to make it up the rest of the week? If we missed our weekly quota, what do we have to do to make it up for the month? And things like that. That openness and that sharing of data really does far more good for a business than it does ill. Hectic work hours. Again, this kind of goes back into one of the original things that was listed as a motivation, is your ability to be flexible and understand that you have to, part of the allure and the appeal of working for an independent company is the ability to work around people's personal lives. Now, obviously, you have to get what you want out of employees, but what you'll find is if you show a little degree of flexibility with employees on things like scheduling and so forth, that they will repay that in loyalty to you. And if you're flexible with them, they'll be flexible with you when you need it, and I guarantee you the day will come when you need them to be flexible. Irritable customers. Yeah, if you could just get rid of all your customers so your employees don't have to deal with any customers, that would be ideal, but you wouldn't be in business very long. But what you can do, how do you overcome this, is you give your employees the appropriate training they need to understand how to do with an irritable customer. Because if an employee says one of the biggest things that motivates me is a customer going away happy, there's nothing better than the feeling of a customer coming in angry and your actions turning their attitude around. So again, it's one of those important training areas where you can dedicate training to convincing and showing employees how to turn an upset or an irate customer into a happy customer and turn what could be a difficult situation into a motivating and learning opportunity for your employees. Uninspiring work environment. And we'll talk about this a little bit here in a minute. Is that, the people who set out today and say, I want to go into a career in retail are probably fewer and far between than they were in the past. But what you can do is you can show your employees that retail can be a very exciting and very rewarding career, but you have to show them how they get there. And that's difficult to illustrate to someone who's coming in as a cashier, but it's not impossible. And we'll talk about ways you can do that a little bit more in detail in a few slides here. So let's dive into some compensation stuff before we get into the training materials. As I said earlier, NRHA conducts something periodically called its Employee Compensation Report. We last conducted this report 5 years ago in 2005, and we asked retailers like yourselves for detailed compensation information about every position in your store, information regarding type of store, position, benefits offered, etc. And again, we say the reason we do this is to provide you guys with kind of a watermark so you can measure what you're doing right now. And I'm just going to give you kind of some highlights of the report. And again, this report is available in greater detail. We featured it in the June issue of Hardware Retailing Magazine. So if you have a copy of that and you want some more detail, you can certainly look in that issue. But if you don't have a copy of it, feel free to email me and I will send you a copy of it. And the entire report will be coming out in the month of July with even greater detail than what was featured in the magazine. But here are some of the highlights. Hardware stores. on average, have 14.7 employees. I don't know how you have 0.7 employees, but I guess it does make sense. But what's important is the overall number of employees is up from 10.5 in 2005. Part of that is because hardware stores have tended to hire more part-time employees to take the place of full-time employees, so employee count went up, but it doesn't necessarily mean hours went up. Across the board, pretty much in every store type, hardware store, home center, and lumberyard, we did see salary increase, which does make sense, and certainly inflation goes up. But one of the other things that forced salaries up was up until recently here, up until the last couple years, so for 3 years of this 5-year cycle, we saw a very tight employment market where good employees were very hard to come by, and employers were having to pay more to get good employees. So it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years, and factoring in this year and the year prior to this, when unemployment rates went up, what that will do to affect salaries at hardware stores and home centers and lumberyards the next time we do their report. But for right now, as of 2010, this is where salaries land. The average manager at a hardware store was making $17.50 and some change per hour. The average sales floor employee was making about $12 an hour, and the average cashier full-time was making about $10 an hour. And as I said, all those salaries were up from 2005. Now, of course, when you look at these salaries, as I've stated, and I'll state it again, they certainly vary by the market you're in and the competition you're up against. But again, the report gets a little bit more into detail with that as well, breaking it down into urban, suburban, and rural markets, and so it lets you get a little bit closer to what kind of market you are serving. Home centers up slightly on employees, 33.6 average, up from 28.1. The average manager was making about $18 an hour, sales floor about 13, and cashier about 9.25. Salary increases were a little bit less dramatic at home centers over the course of the last 5 years, and part of the reason we felt that happened from the feedback we got was that home centers, because they tended to have larger staffs, and typically home centers also carried more than one location, are able to make up to employees in different benefit offerings. So salary is part of the package, but different benefit offerings like profit sharing and so on were more likely to occur at home centers. So the dramatic increases that you saw at hardware stores that weren't necessarily there at home centers, but there were increases nonetheless. Lumberyards. This is kind of the other side of the scale. While salaries pretty much did go up across the board at lumberyards, there were some notable exceptions. The average number of employees went down to 19.6 from 28.9 5 years ago, and the economy is the real catalyst of this. Fewer building projects, fewer remodeling projects, so the lumberyards still remain, but the one area that they've been able to cut to offset the double-digit drop in sales most of them experienced is by cutting headcount, and they did that. Average manager at a lumberyard, $22.50 an hour, sales floor salary $13 an hour, and average cashier about $11.43. The biggest losers throughout the whole thing in terms of compensation were the owners of lumberyards, and as you can imagine, most owners have their overall compensation tied closely to sales, and compensation for owners at lumberyards was down by about 30% over the last 5 years, and which is really about almost exactly to the number what sales were down. So the owners are the ones taking it on the chin, and they've cut headcount, but they still have to maintain their salary position because you have to keep good people. If you have fewer people, you have to keep good people. Last year we did a discussion about all the healthcare changes that are going on, and so one of the important things we wanted to see is where do home improvement retailers weigh in when it comes to offering benefits to their employees. And what we found is that home improvement retailers are really pretty generous when it comes to offering benefits. We look at all kinds of benefits in the study, but for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to look at a couple things. One of them being major medical. 57%, more than half of all the retailers we surveyed, offer major medical benefits to the employees and their families. When you combine that, with the 26%, you have a really good chunk, over 80%, that are offering health insurance benefits to employees, and then the majority of them extending it to their families as well. For employees, they're paying about 70% of the premiums, so the employee is responsible for 30%, and the business is paying about 70%. So again, that's a pretty strong offering when it comes to offering health insurance in today's environment, and then paying about 30% of the premiums for the families. So again, independent retailers and home improvement retailers have found ways to offer benefits to their employees to remain competitive on the employee market. Something else that we ask about in our study is training. And we're going to, as I get into talking more specifically about training and how to set up a training program, I want to touch on a couple things that are somewhat concerning. The NRHA compensation study shows that only 25% of hardware stores have formal training programs, and only 50% of these stores actually have a budget for training. When it comes to providing training, this is across all store types, hardware stores, home centers, and lumberyards. How many hours do you provide per year of training? 17 hours a year for managers, 14 hours a year for full-time employees, and 9 hours a year for part-time. And the average annual training budget per store, this isn't per employee, is $1,667. And I go back to the beginning of my discussion and where we were really trying to illustrate how important your employees are to the way consumers perceive the overall value of your location. Think back to the chart that I showed that illustrated the eroding customer service edge that independent retailers hold over the big boxes, keeps getting smaller and smaller. And then the charts I showed you about how important customers perceive the employees and their knowledge and their friendliness to be. And then consider the fact that on average, every retailer is committing about just over $1,500 a year to train all their employees. And like I said, it's likely your biggest line item expense, but you probably spend more money on oil changes and maintenance on your vehicles than you do on making your employees better. So again, if you're going to regain that customer service edge, if you want to invest in something that's going to make a real noticeable difference in your business, you have to commit both time and budget to training your employees. Now, there are ways to train and ways you can set up training programs that don't necessarily cost a lot of money. But the flip side of that is you have to be willing to invest the time. And 17 hours of training a year, which really translates to 2 days of training for your managers, is just not cutting it. It just doesn't cut it. That 2 days a year is all you spend training your most important employees in your store. So let's move on. What are some of the most common training? Let's really focus on training here. What are some of the most common training methods that retailers list when they're talking about providing employee training? Well, 1 is attending trade shows and buying markets. 2 is reading product literature and catalogs. 3 is reading trade magazines, and we thank you for that. We like to think of ourselves in hardware retailing as a training resource. 4 is online training programs, most of which are either offered through NRHA, which we hope you utilize, and I'll talk a little bit more, and other ones that are offered primarily through manufacturers, distributors, and other wholesalers. The online training programs, interestingly enough, have seen the biggest gain in usage over the past 5 years of all training methods. When you look at these different training methods, the top 3 that we talked about, which was buying markets, product literature, and trade magazines, these aren't really formalized training methods. They're good methods to use, but they're not necessarily part of a formalized training program. I mean, it's an easy way to say, I'm going to give you a copy of Hardware Retailing so you can read that article about pricing, and that's your training for this month. And I like to think they get a lot out of that. But it's so much more effective if you can sit down with the employees and really maybe use the article as a basis for building a training module where you can exchange ideas and answer questions and all that sort of thing. So it's not that the top 3 things we talked about are good tools, but they in and of themselves do not make a training program. And as we talked about, the failure to train certainly has long-term implications for the industry in your store. It's your competitive advantage over the big boxes, and developing a service-driven approach just requires well-trained employees. It is the cost of entry. Past studies have revealed, and it's very important to note this, that 1 out of 5 home improvement employees are looking for another job on any given day. So 20% of your staff, you go out there today, and they're not going to say it to your face, but 20% of your staff is out there looking for another job. And it's not your bottom-tier employees. Your bottom-tier employees are the ones that say, well, this is a good job. I'm not really, I get my paycheck and I'm lucky to have a job. It's your top employees, your ones that can look for other places to go. because they have a great attitude and they bring a lot to your store. And if you're not delivering to them on some of the things we talked about earlier, guess what? They're going to leave, and you're going to be left with the bottom tier employees and having to fill those positions from the top. We talked about this before. Hardware retailing studies showed training was far more important to job satisfaction than employers believed. Half of the new hires we talk to say they do not receive an adequate level of training to prepare them for their job. 50% of your new hires, if you've hired someone in the last month, if you hired 2 people, one of them thinks they haven't received the training they need to do their job well. 1/3 of all former home improvement employees left because of a lack of advancement opportunities. Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's very important that you illustrate to people, particularly the ones you want to keep, that there are places they can go in your company. Less than 50% of full and part-time employees say they get the training they need, and employees understand the better they do, the more opportunities they will have. So if you have an employee that wants to advance, and this is the kind of employee you want to keep around, the guy that's looking to do better at your company, and you don't provide them with the tools they need to do better, they're going to leave because they're going to get more frustrated. A commitment to training. We went in the same survey where we asked employees whether they receive the adequate training for their job. We asked them, what areas specifically are you dissatisfied with the training you receive? About 30% said they're dissatisfied with the level of product knowledge training they get. 20% said they're dissatisfied with the level of selling skills training they get. And nearly 40%, most of all, said they're dissatisfied with the safety training they get. And boy, this is a scary area, guys, because not only is safety training the area where they feel they're not satisfied with what they get, but the biggest thing you need to promise your employees on a daily basis, and I know you appreciate this, is that you're going to come to work in a safe atmosphere and you're going to go home in the same condition that you came to work in. And we all know there are a lot of poisonous things, a lot of sharp things, a lot of pokey things in a hardware store, and safety training is paramount. And not only is it so important, but it also reduces your liability. If you say, I'm not so concerned about it from my employees getting hurt, which I can't imagine you would say, but you should be concerned about it from a liability standpoint, because one bad accident in your store can be the difference between being in business and not being in business. So where do you start when you're talking about a training program? Well, first you got to start with a sincere commitment. You got to make a commitment to it. You get out of this webinar, and when you get out of the webinar, go back to your desk and say, what am I going to do to develop and start a training program? What are the realistic things I can do that I can help my employees get better at what they do? And get out a yellow legal pad and make a list of 5 things that you want to do. Okay? Then, right after you're done with those 5 things, set a budget. And the reason I say to set a budget is because if you don't set a budget, it doesn't become real. If you don't tie money to it, it's just ideas. So it doesn't have to be a huge budget. If you just look at what we talked about, the industry average for commitment, and start there, well, at least it's a start. How do you start with a $1,600 budget a year for training, and how do you get the most training for your employees out of that budget? The other thing you need to do is you need to make your employees and your managers accountable. If you're going to go through these steps to provide them with the training, then you need to make sure that they're taking advantage of it, that they're utilizing it on the job, and they're taking advantage of the methods that you give them to get better at what they do. And then you also need to identify the areas that you need to train. What are the glaring places within your company that you need training? Do you have a staff that knows a lot about the product but isn't very good with customer interaction? Do you have a staff that knows about the product and is good with customer interaction, but they really don't understand retail operations or merchandising or policies? And identify 3 or 4 areas that you want to address. You can't swallow the whole thing at once, so at least take the little bites off and say, these are the 3 areas that I want to train on for the next 6 months. And in 6 months, I want to make sure we cover these 3 areas to death in our employee meetings. We want to make sure that these 3 areas are just pounded home and that our employees really get trained in those. Then you move on to the next 3. So what are really the 4 basic training areas? Well, there's new hire orientation, product knowledge, retail skills, selling skills, merchandising, operations, that kind of thing, and safety and loss prevention training. So those are probably, if you're looking for ways to start, there are 4 areas where you can think about starting, and we'll look at those in greater detail over the next couple slides. Another good thing to do is to take some of the pressure off yourself, create a training team. Bring in different people from different areas of your operation. It could be a cashier, it could be a manager, it could be a department head. Bring them in for their input. I mean, it's a great way to integrate them into the process and get them to buy into the process, but it's also a little bit of a reward. I mean, as a manager, you probably have cashiers that understand the POS system and can run the cash register better than you. Identify who your best cashier is and say, I want to clone you. How do I clone you for other employees? Help me develop a training program, and it'll be exciting for them. It achieves so many things that we're talking about them. It makes them buy into the project. It gets them more excited about something. It gives them something that breaks away from the norm of what they do every day, and lets them really get buy-in into helping people be better. And then formalize the program. It doesn't have to be a formal binder, a 3-ring binder filled with stuff. It could be just some copies that you run off, a couple of pages, an outline, if you will, of what you want to achieve with your program and how you're going to achieve it. Say this month we want to focus on selling skills. And what 4 things are we going to hit on selling skills this month that are going to get our employees better trained? And put dates next to it, put times and budgets next to it, and that could be your program for this month. And do it by quarter, or do it by 6 months. Or if you really get up the gumption, do it by a year and have it out there so you have a plan. But nonetheless, find a way to formalize it. So I'm going to go through these kind of quickly here, but when you talk about new hires, what are some things you could do in new hire training? Well, you have to make sure that they know what they need to do for the basics of the job. So create a checklist. Get with cashiers, department managers, that kind of thing. Say, after the first week, what are these things these guys need to know before we turn them loose on customers? What is their job? They need to know where things are in the store. They need to know who their coworkers are. They need to know emergency procedures. They need to know worksite rules, dress code, phone policies, when and where they can take breaks, when they get paid, and then customer policies, returns, answering questions. You should make sure that every new hire is completely comfortable answering all those questions before you turn them loose. Quiz them. Come up with sheets and quiz them before they get on the floor. Do role playing. Have them interact with other employees like they were customers to train them and coach them through that environment. Something else, and this came from a retailer that we talked to that I thought was a great thing. From day one with her employees, she created a training diary. And that training diary set the specific things. I mean, it was very specific. Some of it was kind of boilerplate stuff, like within your first 3 months, you have to do this, this, and this. Before you ever go on the floor, you have to know this, this, and this. But then she took the time to sit with the employee and say, well, what are the goals that you have? What would you like to learn? And she would even go so far as to ask him questions, 5 years from now, what would you like to be doing? 10 years from now, what would you like to be doing? And how can we as an employer help you get there? And what that really did was show the employees, listen, we're committed to we know this is a two-way street, and we're committed to making you a better person and get you closer to what your life goals are. We don't just want to take from you and write you a paycheck. We want to make you an involved part of this process and figure out ways together that we can get to that goal, that we can benefit from your service while you're here. Hopefully you might decide to make a career out of it, but realistically, if you don't, how can we get you committed for the time that you are here to do the best job you can? Kind of what we talked about in the training diary, include all pertinent information, training checklist and completion dates, a section for short and long-term goals, and use the diary during every performance review. Every performance review, get that out and go through their progress. Let them talk back to you about how are we fulfilling our end of the bargain, how are we living up to your needs, and where we're falling short so we can make sure we address those things. Product knowledge training, what are some of the resources? Again, it's always so important to point out product knowledge training. It's such an important part of what you do because there are so many intricate things that customers come in and want solutions for at the hardware store. But it's not the end-all, be-all. You have to have your customer or your employees trained to service customers and answer their questions. But like I always say, if you have a guy that knows everything in the world there is about plumbing and he's a surly, loudmouth SOB and no one wants to deal with him, it doesn't help. So it's part of the equation, but it's an important part. And there are a lot of different resources for product knowledge training. NRHA has a lot of product knowledge that we can share with you and through our employee training programs. Vendors serve as fantastic training resources. You should have regular store meetings to introduce new products. When you come back from a wholesaler show or the National Hardware Show or something like that, and you bring all these exciting products, don't just put them on the shelf. Make sure your employees understand why you're excited about it so they can get excited about it and they can help sell those products to the customers. Retail skills. This is another area that unfortunately often falls last in training, along with things like safety training. But you need to understand that there's a lot more to becoming a good retail employee than just product knowledge. There are things like merchandising, selling skills, customer service, customer interaction, conflict resolution, and all those things should be integrated into your holistic training program. You might have someone that knows a lot about plumbing. Maybe they were a master plumber and they're retired, but if they don't know how to answer the phone or how to greet customers or how to do suggestive selling and add-on selling, then they're really falling short in their commitment to you, and they're really not living up to their full potential. First and foremost, one of the most frustrating things for customers is employees who don't know the policies. If they say, can I buy this paint, and if I don't like the way it looks, can I bring it back? And the employee says yes, and that happens, and they bring it back, and the manager works with them and says, I'm sorry, you can't bring them back. Boy, that's the quickest way to turn off customers. So all your employees should have a thorough understanding of what your policies are, whether it's what hours. Do little quizzes. Call your employees and say, how late are you open? Are you open on Sundays? Are you going to be open on Easter? Are you going to be open on Christmas? Are you going to be open on Boxing Day? All those kind of things. You need to ask your employees those questions because they need to know the answers to it, because that's the quickest way to frustrate a customer. To teach these retail skills, not just the answers to basic store operations questions, but things like merchandising. Enlist the help of your managers and your assistant managers, or if there's an employee who does a particularly good job with merchandising, use them as a trainer to help train other employees on merchandising. Hold how-to merchandising classes. Keep reinforcing the message. Reward employees for their good behavior. If someone did an end cap that just worked out great for you, do so. It doesn't have to be big. Buy them a gift certificate to Starbucks or something like that, and say, hey, I just wanted to give this to you because you did a great job with the end caps that I asked you to do, and it means a lot to them. Not just the recognition, but again, it's one of those little monetary things that you can give that means a lot to the customers, or it means a lot to the employees when they're weighing, do I want to continue to work here or not? Do role playing. This is one of the most valuable tools you could use, and it's kind of fun, and the employees get into it in employee meetings. Even if you're introducing a new product, you went to your wholesaler show and you found a new product, you explained the features and benefits, pick someone from the crowd and put two guys up there and say, Jimmy, I want you to sell this to Jamie. And let Jimmy sell that product to Jamie and coach him through it. Everybody will laugh and it'll be a good time, but you'll get your point across. And so when Jimmy has to deal with that in a real world situation, he feels less anxious and more confident about his ability to do it. It's also a great way to teach conflict resolution. Have someone pose as an angry customer and come in and see how they resolve the situation. So when it really happens in the real world, it's not quite as explosive as it might be. Safety and loss prevention training. NRHA has a great new loss prevention training series. I'm not trying to sell it like Ginsu knives here, but I just want to point it out to people that we do have these tools available. Our first module deals with internal theft, which is a great tool for managers, assistant managers, head cashiers to use that could talk them through the process of keeping an eye on less than scrupulous employees to make sure that they're not taking anything from the store. The second module is on shoplifting, to teach all employees how to do a better job at mitigating outside theft, and together those two things there could be a very easy training session that you could go through your class with, or go through in a classroom situation with your employees, and they can really lose something and take away. Not only do the modules, not only are they kind of like interactive, but they have question and answers, so you can make sure your employees understand the concepts being expressed. And in addition to shrinkage, like I said earlier, the number one area where employees don't feel they receive enough training is in safety training. We offer some safety training modules through NRHA, like forklift training and so on. But if not, there are a lot of other local organizations, the local Red Cross, the local community colleges, police departments, fire departments, places like that you could tap that will give you free training to your employees, even if it's in something like CPR or in how to deal with first aid. If someone cuts themselves, what is the procedure you use, all that kind of stuff. It's very important, and you should really take advantage of it. It's not only important to keep your employees safe, but it's also important to mitigate against loss for your business. Once you've identified the training goals, you need to set a schedule. And that's, again, one of the hardest things to do, because it's easy to say, I know training's important. I know I want to make my employees better. I know I want to manage them better. I don't know where I'm going to fit it in with the time. We'll try and do it when there's time. No, like I said, at least for a month, even if you start taking baby steps and saying, at our July employee meeting, we're going to go over 2 training topics, and we're going to take an hour, and we're going to do it then. Do it, and set stuff down on a calendar for when it's done and when you expect your employees to have it completed. Make your training sessions manageable. Make sure they fit the type of training being delivered. Don't expect that you're going to go in and teach everybody in your store about plumbing in one one-hour session. You're not going to do it. Maybe you could teach them about the 10 most popular projects that customers come to work on in your plumbing department in an hour, and how to answer those questions. But make it, man. Don't create an atmosphere where you're going to come up short both with your expectations and with what employees need from you. And then again, it's important to provide employee interaction time, role-playing, and be willing to take their questions and answers. Evaluate your training program's success. Don't just start it and go through the motions. I mean, how are you going to know what works? It's just like a new product. If you add a new product to your store, you really need to monitor how it sells to know if you're going to order that product again. Was it successful? The same thing's true with training. Monitor your success. Document your training. Have managers watch for how employees are implementing their skills. Ask employees for suggestions on new training and provide feedback on the training we provided. After you tell them how to sell a new product, a month later, ask them, how has that worked out for you? Do customers like that product? Do you have all the answers you need to the product? Follow up on it, but constantly be monitoring how you're training so you can learn how to do it better. Offer, again, this goes back to one of those employee motivators, and obviously compensation is one of them. Offer your employees for incentives for completing training. If you want them to complete the NRHA Basic Skills course, great. It's a commitment of time and effort for them, so put a carrot at the end of that stick and say, if you complete the training program, you will get this. Or if it's a smaller training thing, if you're training them, have a little contest. Say, we brought in this new product. We're going to train you guys, provide you all the features and benefits, and at the end of a 1-month period, we're going to see who sold the most of these, and I'm going to give them a $100 gift card or something like that. It doesn't have to be big things, but you can tie training to incentives. So, I hate to use this analogy, but like Pavlov's dog, if you're ringing a bell every time you feed them, they're going to want you to ring that bell more. So anyway, just think about it as you're going through, because it's an important way to keep your employees motivated and involved in becoming better. This is my last Ginsu Knives pitch, and it's kind of coming to a close here, but I just want to remind everybody that the North American Retail Hardware Association offers a number of programs that are free to NRHA members. And if you are a member of the ACE Hardware Cooperative, the True Value Cooperative, Home Hardware, and a variety of other regional distributors, you either have access to these services for free or at a greatly discounted cost. But let's say you're not part of any of that. Let's say you're a lone wolf and you're out there and you're completely independent. It only costs you $195 a year to have access to all of NRHA's training. That's all of our product knowledge training, all of our selling skills training, all of our 3 pennies of profit, all the reports we do, the employee compensation report, the cost of doing business report, all that sort of stuff. $195 a year. You can put as many employees as you want through those training courses, and it doesn't cost you a dime more. So when you're sitting down and thinking about your training budget, if you can't even start with the industry average, which is $1,600, start with $195 and dive into what we have to offer you. We have product knowledge training, loss prevention, selling skills. We also have a very valuable resource for managers and owners. It's a tool called our Human Resources Handbook. We had an HR expert, a fellow by the name of Ray Parker, who is very good at what he does, and he's available for consultations individually to businesses, but he helped us put together something called the Human Resources Handbook, which is available for free to all NRHA members, and it's a guide to everything you would want to know, from how to interview employees to where to recruit employees from, how to set up training programs in detail, how to make sure you're EEOC compliant, all those kind of things wrapped up in one great book, and it's free to you as an NRHA member. So if you'd like more information about NRHA and our training programs, there's the number 800-772-4424, or Scott Wright is our training and member services director. His email is swright@nrha.org, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from you if you have any questions. I would like to thank you all for coming today, and I hope you came away with something that's of use to you, and I would encourage you to attend future NRHA webinars, because those are also a great way and a great resource for training your employees. Not only do we hold the webinars live, but they're also available to you through www.nrha.org as a recorded webinar, so you can give it to your staff at leisure. They are completely free for anyone in the industry to attend. So again, I'd like to thank you for your time. If you have any questions about the subject matter we discussed today, or anything you'd like more information about in detail, don't hesitate to send me an email at dant@nrha.org. I'd like to thank you again for your time.